The following program does not necessarily reflect the views of the staff or management of United Cable of Scottsdale Limited.
Today's program is directed primarily toward the pet lovers in our audience. I'm Bill Billing from here in Scottsdale, and with me today is Barbara Wurts, also from Scottsdale, and her friend Freddie Maltese. Both Barbara and Freddie are international travelers. I've seen a lot of the photographs that Barbara has taken of her travels in Europe with Freddie, and I was really amazed that with the ease with which she and Freddie were able to travel throughout that section of the world. I had labeled under the impression that if you were planning to travel to Europe and you had a pet, that you were faced with placing the pet in a kennel, sort of imprisoning the pet while you were gone. But this is not the case. My discussions with Barbara not only revealed that she and Freddie had no problems in their travel in Europe, but that they enjoyed each other's company, and there were benefits for Barbara in having Freddie with her. As you can see, Freddie is in a little pack that Barbara has made up, and that this is the way that they traveled throughout Europe. Barbara, could you tell the audience some of the experiences that you had in Europe with Freddie?
I'd be delighted to, and especially to share some surprises that I had, and also things that relieved my anxieties, having no knowledge prior to departure with Freddie, what was waiting for me in Europe. I had to learn everything from the requirements of health certificates, transportation, what was allowed. Freddie, being very small, could go in cabin with me, and of course this allowed him total tranquility of being with me. Now, if he were a larger dog, this would have been possible. However, the big surprise for me was the ease throughout Europe, and the dogs are welcomed in hotels and buses, airplanes, trains. An ease of travel I'd never experienced in the United States, in fact.
Well, if someone in our audience, Barbara, was planning a trip to most of the countries in Europe, and I believe that all but a few countries allow the pets,
yes,
is that right? Which countries
that's
do not?
correct. Even though Freddie, he's British by birth. In fact, his birthday, and he and the Queen share the same day, 21st April. He can't return to Britain, because, at least as a holiday-making dog, because he would have to undergo a 6 months quarantine to return there. And also Sweden, Norway, and Finland share this. They do not, they are island states, and of course, if you can control rabies in that way, naturally they want to do so. But any of the other countries are wide open. In fact, Freddie has traveled now through 10 countries.
Yes. That's great. Well, now, if someone in our audience has a little pet like Freddie, and they're thinking, my next trip to Europe,
holiday.
France, Germany, Italy.
Any of those countries are by far and away superb for travel. Like I was saying, the ease of travel, the ability to check into any hotel, whether it's a B&B, up to bread and breakfast, as we call it, bread and breakfast, up to your 5-star luxury deluxe hotel. The dog is no problem. The only countries I found that are more like the United States, strangely enough, are Spain and Portugal. Now, you may get a couple of times saying the dog, we don't normally take dogs, but if they see he's very well behaved, in fact, I've been in that situation, and they look at Freddie and they say, oh, no problem, at all. But throughout, and even in Spain and Portugal, there is, as I say, no problem, but throughout the other countries, I have never come up in a situation where there was not an ease traveling to any hotel at all. It was very, very easy. But what I would like to call to our audience attention is the need, before traveling, of obtaining the appropriate health certificate, which is a health certificate with rabies, guaranteeing rabies has been given not more than a year and not less than a month prior to departure. And then this is stamped by the Federal Veterinarian's office, and the dog is then ready to go.
Well, Barbara, your health certificate for Freddie then was in effect Freddie's passport. Is that pretty much the way it is?
That's correct. That's the dog's passport abroad, the health certificate.
Now, on your airline flight over, you said there was only one pet allowed in the cabin?
Yes, I was telling you about the fact that Freddie goes in cabin because he's small, and since there's only one dog in cabin per cabin, and of course the tourist area is divided up in three, and then you have ambassador, and then you have the first class. So as you can see, if the particular day many dogs decide to travel, it's very important to get a reservation in on that. Some years ago, the dog was considered overweight, and some airlines perhaps still do that, but I've noticed that more and more airlines, rather than weighing the dog, weighing him in before the flight, there are some flat tariffs for travel, flat tariff for travel on some airlines. But Freddie every flight has been a star, and we've gotten absolutely wonderful treatment from TWA has been marvelous, Swiss Air, Air France. I mean, I could go on and on. There's many, Lufthansa, I think. But everyone Freddie seems to bring smiles to their faces, and he's just the star of the flight.
I noticed that you have a little, carrying a little child's. What was this?
Well, the idea came from, of course, seeing children being carried around on their mom's chest, and I've found in need of both hands and not having them available on occasion. And there's many times I haven't wanted Fred either on a particular street, or he's been tired when I've been out trekking around in the Alps, and being small legs, even though he can go very far, it just dawned on me that that would be very useful. And a cousin of mine sewed up one, and we made a new one for me, and I call it the pet pack.
You sewed up the leg holes. And on your trips, on the longer flights, the over water flights, Freddie actually is in your...
No, he's not in that. That is very useful for like carrying him down corridors in streets. In the aircraft, that's good you brought that up. In the aircraft, he must be in a container that is put under the seat, so therefore you are restricted on measurements. I believe it's like 21 by 9 by 8. I'm not sure on that, but it has to be able to go under the seat for takeoff and landings. He has, on all the airlines I mentioned, he has been able to be out on the floor, and of course all the passengers, always an abundance of fellow passengers who come by and want to help babysit him while I make a trip to the bathroom or something like that.
But after the plane takes off?
Yes, you can pull him out from under the seat, and he can carry on just like
just like you were in your living room.
Yes, although I do know people who will purchase a seat for the dog who can do that. Yes, they can do that too. But I think it's also important to note that if it's a larger dog, and of course many larger dogs do travel, they do go cargo, and then it's important to have a carrying cage that is big enough to have plenty of room to stand up and turn around and have his favorite toy. And most dogs make the trip very comfortably, have a good nap, probably arrive more relaxed in Customs Hall than their persons do after the trip. And anytime we've ever arrived, all the customs officers have this huge smile, and they say, welcome Arizona dog, the dog.
Oh, I was going to say to the audience, if any of them have a pet about your size that they'd like to prepare a carrying or a little child's kit for them, it's a real simple thing to do. And so I think that you might be interested in making up one of these, or converting a child's kit to carry your pet in while you're on your trip.
That is certainly for me.
I've seen so many of the photographs that you made while you were on your European trip, where you had your little pet with you. Well, after the plane trip over and you landed in France, or was it France you landed?
Yes, in fact, well, we've landed in many different countries, but France was, in fact, his first flight abroad was in France, and this is when I really came to know that the French, I've always heard that they do love dogs, and I came to know that this is certainly a wonderful characteristic in their personality. As Freddie, the first meal he had was in a deluxe restaurant in Paris, and he sat beside me, and this is when I was overjoyed to the fact that it was so different than the United States that the dog could go right into the restaurant with me. And I don't feed him any people food, although some French people, you know, they do, and the rest, the waiters offered to bring him whatever, you know, croquette de boeuf, anything he wanted there at the table. But I have had one experience that was later in Bavaria, in Germany. Fred was being very well behaved at the Gasthaus restaurant, very typical, a lot of atmosphere, and my son and I were dining, and Freddie couldn't keep his eyes off a table next to us. And I didn't understand this. Two men sitting there, and they weren't even eating steak. So I didn't understand until later, out from under the table, when the men left with these two gigantic, I don't even know what breed. One might be a mixed German Shepherd, but they were huge. Both, certainly, I'm sure, aware of Freddie's presence, but the reason I'm saying this is to bring the attention that I have never seen a situation where either my dog has been obnoxious or not behaved in the restaurant, or any of the other dogs, no matter what the size is.
Well, that seems unusual to me, that the behavior of the dogs, all of them then in Europe, is
very good. And
very
in
good.
fact, at first I was a little worried about Freddie, even though I think he's a fairly well-behaved dog. I didn't know how, under those circumstances, never having taken him to restaurants before, but it was lots of fun being able to take him in, and a new experience. And as the more that we have traveled, the more that I have seen that it's such a very common occurrence that the only thing I can think of is that the dogs do it since they're pups and are very well behaved.
But you weren't the only one in the restaurant with a dog.
And
That's
it's
common.
very, very easy to meet people, and I think that's one of the things that I would say about traveling in Europe with a dog, is that you're even taken for a native. People will come up and ask you the time. And even though I do speak French and Spanish, but I've been throughout Germany on many occasions, and I've had people come up and ask me the time, and of course, unfortunately, I can't help them out too well.
It was because of
Freddie, yes, because they think that by walking the dog and having a dog that I must live down the street.
Exactly.
Yes.
Do you think that you were more accepted by the, say, the French people?
Oh,
or the
definitely. I think the French have a reputation, perhaps, of treating maybe Americans in particular, or just foreigners in general, without extreme hospitality you might find, say, in Spain or some countries like that. But I have found that the dog has bridged that gap, and where, yes, it has, definitely. And they either feel there is a rapprochement there that because of the dog, and I've had both men and women alike approach me wanting to ask about the dog and that sort of thing. Of course, fortunately, I can talk to them because I do speak French. But even without that, they try to speak English to be able to talk about the dogs or their dogs and my dogs.
Well, they figure an American that brings their little cat is not an ugly Yank. Is that it?
The French love, as a nation, do love their dogs.
Oh, that's nice.
They really do. And I can't say that the French are the only. I mean, I know that I've heard about that, but it would be very hard for me to say which country does love dogs more. It would be very hard for Freddie to say too.
Yeah, I know we had a discussion a few days ago of some of your experiences. I remember you told me one time you went into a French restaurant, and maybe you...
Oh, the two poodles. I was telling you about this is a restaurant I had gone into, and a lady came in with her two dogs, and she must have been very well known because the waiter immediately brought out two plates, set them under the table, and her two little dogs went under the table, as if they did this every evening. And they were waited on, the dogs were waited on just as if they were a client, you know. Well, they were a client, I suppose, in the restaurant. Also, I'd like to mention, this is a bit off the topic of what is needed to go to Europe with a dog, but in France they have something called the Week of the Dog, and many dog shows take place during this week. And many of the restaurants will offer a special, if you go in and dine and bring your dog, they offer a special menu and special plate for your dog, which normally isn't offered. So that it is carried to extremes in some cases. But it is important, I think, for people to know that are going to travel that the health certificate, as far as requirements, is, of course, prerequisite number one, and two is to get all the information necessary from the consulate or the embassy, because even though in general, it's very similar, the requirements. But just in case something has changed, that's very important to make that contact. Also to contact the airlines, make the reservation so you're not disappointed in the day you want to travel and if other dogs are traveling. And just to be made aware that it's so easy to have that, to take the travel, that the dog doesn't have to stay in the kennel ever. He's welcome in all hotels, restaurants, trains, buses, boats.
So any of you in our audience who are planning a trip to France or some of the European countries, you may find that you're more acceptable if you do bring your pet with you. You take them to the restaurant, you take them to the hotel, the buses.
Yes,
the trains.
That's right, everywhere.
Everything.
Now on the bus, I found that's why my pet pack has been so convenient, because on trains and on buses they do require many times they do require, if there's someone who's on duty does require it. Many times I've been on and no one has said anything. They do like to have your pet in a container. And I have found that the pet pack has always been okay. And if I'm just on a shopping trip, I have found that the pet pack, I can roll that up and then put it in my purse, and I'm not carrying about shopping a container with me that usually one might have to carry to put him in. So for me, that's why this has turned into a necessity for me. And people have chased after me. Since they've never seen this before. I've had people in Germany and all throughout the country chasing after me to say, you know, where have you find such a thing?
Cute little item, I know.
So
I've
anyone
seen
can make one up, yes.
all of your, so many of your photographs where you have Freddie and the...
yes, they do.
I was wondering, you mentioned that you could take your pets into the restaurants, and they eat scraps, obviously, in there, or you could order food.
I don't give them the scraps, and this is... getting to an area that's very important. One of my extreme concerns prior to departure in my first trip was, what do I feed him? Do they have dog food similar to mine? Is the balance, is it a balanced food? I have to put everyone at ease. There is everything you would want to have for a dog. You find it just like you do in the United States. There is no problem at all. And it's dry food, canned foods, some richer, there's diet foods, there's just no problem at all. Your food, whatever you're feeding, can be duplicated easily. Just take a little bag with a couple of days and no problem at all. Another important issue, of course, is to be relaxed in the fact that there is always, in any of the larger cities, a veterinarian who'll be speaking English. It's so wonderful to have that knowledge, to know that you can, through the tourist bureau, or if it happens to be a capital city, through the embassy, to obtain a veterinarian if your pet, needs it.
That is important. You don't have to take food with you, and you have the services of a veterinarian wherever you go.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Well, that is. Yeah.
I was going to say that one particular, thank goodness Freddie hasn't needed, but one occasion he did over the years need to see a veterinarian, and this was in Vienna. And after we came back, I found a little bouquet of flowers, a little bone, which gift, a doggy toy that had been left there by the housekeeping girls and the management, just to make sure Freddie was fine and all right, and receiving phone calls from some of the guests to make sure. So just to say that dogs are really loved and cared for as much as the people clients of the hotel.
Marvelous. And Freddie enjoyed the trip. He didn't get ill, or
no. He's never had a problem with air travel or sea travel in the little boats. However, any veterinarian, of course, could prescribe something if the dog does have that problem, and of course that usually tends just to make them sleep a bit on the voyage.
How long on your trips to Europe? I guess that they were a vacation, but maybe business trip.
Yes, part is pleasure. I have a son in school in Europe, and I market for hotels. I market for my father's hotels abroad. We're hoping, of course, this will be a good year to have foreigners come and spend their hard-earned cash with us here in the United States.
Sure. But you were there for an extended period of time with Freddie, and no problems.
And he went everywhere, some of the offices, because straight away I found that many business people, especially entrepreneurs, people with their own businesses, when you go in, there'll be a dog actually in the office. They'll take a dog to work. So I have to say it's a whole different, the dog's life in Europe is not comparable to our dog's life in the United States. I mean, you might want to use the French term, the vie du chien.
What is it?
The vie du chien. Vie du chien is what the French call it, and it's certainly, it's a very positive phrase rather than sort of a negative phrase of dog's life that we have.
That translates the dog's life.
The dog's life, but with a very optimistic connotation, because they live a fairly good life over there.
Well, that's great.
Freddie
Yes.
thinks so. Isn't that true, Freddie? Do you have anything else to say? Huh?
Well, and I think that primarily with speaking here at the audience today, I'm sure that I feel certain that some of them were like I was prior to meeting you, that it was next to impossible to take your pet with you. I was just wondering of other questions that might come up. It seems like you've answered most of them.
Well, I think that the very important questions, at least that I had, and that I was very concerned about, was the food, the veterinarian being available, how I would be received, what I must do prior to departure, and knowing that it was the ease with which the airlines, at least as I say, the airlines that I traveled, I can highly recommend TWA and Air France and Swissair. They're superb, absolutely superb. In fact, one time I was upgraded just because I had a dog. My ticket was upgraded, yes, from tourist to ambassador, just because Fred was along. So there are benefits other than just...
How could that, or what happened to that?
Well, he was just there, and I'm not sure if there was another dog in cabin, or just the fact that they wanted to give me a bit more space. And this particular airline was Swissair. And so I got a bit more space because of Freddie.
So because you had your pet with you, you profited from it. And
yes, sir.
It appears that from your observations, it appears to me that that the American that takes their pet is held in higher esteem by the Europeans.
That is true. That is true. They feel that if you like dogs, you can't be all bad at all.
That's
That's true.
I can like you, Freddie.
Yes, he likes Bill. Yes, he does. And Freddie loves to give kisses, and he likes girls.
Good, good. Well, Barbara, do you...
Well, I'd like to show our guests some of Freddie's photos from his photo albums.
That's right. Freddie has an album, doesn't he?
He has an album. Yes, he does.
And I wondered if any of the people in the audience, if they had questions to ask you, that they could call the RSVP office in
we would try to answer any questions that I
Scottsdale
haven't.
at the Senior Citizens Center, and if they had a specific question, you'd answer it for them.
That I haven't answered here, I'd be delighted to.
Sure, if any of you wanted to. And then Freddie has got a series of films or of clips of some of his experiences in Europe. Shall we take a shot of you now, Freddie? Huh? Okay.
Do that? That's wonderful. Yeah, we do that. You want to give Bill a kiss? Give Bill a kiss? Kiss, kiss, kiss. With the American dollar enjoying excellent purchasing power in many countries throughout Europe, I decided to join the exodus to the land of my forefathers. Well, not exactly to my recent forefathers, since they are English, and I'd have to do a term of 6 months in the quarantine pen before ever getting to step on British soil. So as much as I would love to have sampled English cuisine, run through Hyde Park, had an upstairs ride on those bright red buses, and maybe even a visit to the Queen and her corgis, the continent holds more than enough excitement for this Maltese. After months of travel, including the plane, the train, the boat, car, and bus, through many countries, I decided that this sort of international travel might appeal to some fellow four-legged friends and their persons back home. Adventures in foreign lands with wonderful parks everywhere you turn, the gastronomical fun of trying international cuisine and typical regional dishes. All the countries have a choice of doggy dinners, canned and dry, that make your mouth water. European dogs take their owner for walks much more often than their American counterparts. The possibility for making new friends and thus bringing closer understanding between breeds is in itself an excellent reason for applying for a passport. And we all know how easy it is for our persons to meet people with us along. Each of us is a roving diplomat representing his country. Perhaps with our enthusiastic tail wags and our owner's sincere handshakes, we can bring more warmth to international friendships. That brings us to the first requirements in planning your trip to abroad. The health requirements for the American dog going to Europe. Each country has its particular requirement for entry. However, most European countries are quite similar, except for Norway, Finland, and Sweden, island nations, which have some quarantine, as does Britain. So these countries are, of course, not suitable for dogs on holiday. This information is available from the Federal Veterinarian's Office and from the appropriate embassy or consulate concerned. The second major item is your travel arrangements. Getting there. Do you fancy air travel or a leisurely cruise? If you are a small dog like yours truly and can fit into a travel case put under the seat for takeoff and landings, then air travel is most enjoyable. On several of the international air carriers, if your person is well behaved, you can even sit on his or her lap. If you prefer the crossing to jet sailing, then you will want to know that the QE2 has excellent dog accommodations for the 5-day voyage. And after arriving at Southampton, one can immediately carry on to France by ferry with no fear of serving a 6-month quarantine sentence. The high outdoor dog terrace is terrific and would be envied by many first-class passengers. There is a steward at your every beck and bark, and your person can come to visit whenever you wish. That is a switch, your person coming to you. We shall begin with Paris, France, since that is where my first memorable TW8 touched down. After a quick wave through passport control by the impressive uniformed gendarme with a warm smile, my owner and I made our way to baggage claim. Customs didn't even care to look at my doggy dish or favorite ball. So my owner whisked me outside to a welcome light pool. My friends, you can enjoy the pleasures of perfect acceptance in the great restaurants of France, whether on your person's lap, as in my case, or under the table, being served your own croquette de boeuf. With appropriate behavior, you will have approving nods from all. Keen observation of most European dogs would be recommended, as their social graces in most cases are exceptional. If I were asked which country of Europe loves dogs most, I would be very hard-pressed to come up with a single answer. However, as much as the French love dogs and are famous for this wonderful characteristic in their nature, I would have to say my personal findings put the Germanic countries on top of the list, perhaps A for Austria in the lead. However, my Amsterdam arrival was greeted with a huge smile from the Dutch official as he said, "Welcome, Arizona dog," revealing early in my stay how special dogs are to the Dutch. So, I suppose the answer to the question would be that every country, in its own special way, responds with smiles and warmth to us four-legged travelers. As usual, what better reward for us than bringing smiles to faces and happiness to hearts everywhere?
Barbara, I've certainly enjoyed speaking with you today, and Freddie, I'd like to ask Freddie maybe one little question. Freddie, did they have fire plugs in France and Germany over there? Fire hydrants? Forgot. Okay, yes. We'll have a little toast to Freddie. Barbara, it was awfully nice to have you here.
All your audience, and that
Thank you.
if they travel to abroad with their dog, I hope they have as happy travels as Freddie and I have had.
I think that's just great. And Freddie, come back and see us again, okay?
We'd be delighted to.